Rob Demovsky covers the Green Bay Packers for ESPN. Had to bring him on with the big Jordan Love news today. Rob, how you doing?
I'm great, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for coming on short notice. So I tried to explain what happened here in terms of them not picking up the fifth-year option but signing him to a contract extension. I probably didn't do a very good job. Can you walk me through what just went down today?
Yeah, so everyone thought, myself included, that there were two options on the fifth-year option. Either pick it up, and he's guaranteed $20.7 million for the 2024 season, or don't pick it up, and he's going into his last year of his deal as a first-year starter. Well, there's a third option, and that was a contract extension, which is what they did. It essentially really gave him the same 2024 total of $20 million, $22 million, but they're able to do two things with it. One, they give him some money up front, which says to him, look, we believe in you. We're giving you this money. You're going to get some of it now. And two, it allows them to split that over 2 years of their salary cap. Because right now, if they just had picked up the fifth-year option, he would have been $2.2 million of his salary this year. And the other $20 million would be on next year's cap. So we know this team's been in cap trouble for a while. They're in it this year, but they won't take as much of it this year because they know it is kind of a rebuilding year, even though they won't use that word. Because after this year, they're free of Aaron Rodgers on the cap. $40.3 million of dead money is Aaron Rodgers' cap this year. And next year, they're completely free. So they were able to keep Jordan Love, give him a little bit of a pat on the back and say, don't worry about it. You know, if things don't start great, we're not going to dump you because we got you for this year. And by doing this, we're going to be able to get a few more players next off season because we'll have more cap space.
What does a rebuilding year mean in Green Bay? Does it mean another year right around 500? Is that the expectation level from the fan base there?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. If you go back to 2008, and I'm not saying history will repeat itself, but as you know, it sort of already has with Rodgers going to the Jets and after Favre went to the Jets. When Rodgers took over, he had threw 28 touchdowns and 13 interceptions and threw for over 4,000 yards. And everybody realized, this guy's going to be pretty good. In fact, they gave him a contract extension in the middle of that 2008 season. But what people forget is they were 6-10 that year. And Rodgers had an experienced group of receivers. He had an experienced Donald Driver. He had an experienced Greg Jennings. He had guys that would go on to be, big stars with Jordy Nelson being the top. Also, James Jones, very good player. Jordan Love doesn't have that. He's got basically two receivers that have played any meaningful football, and that was Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs last year when they were rookies. They drafted three more receivers this year. So basically he's starting over with guys that just don't have a lot of experience. Same thing in the tight end room. They drafted two tight ends. So three receivers, two tight ends, and most of those guys are probably going to play, and some of them might play a fairly significant role. Specifically, they're top, both tight ends, and then the top receiver that they took, Jaden Reed out of Michigan State in the second round. I mean, he's probably going to be their number 3 receiver right away. So I think there's going to be some growing pains, and I think there's going to be a sense of patience with him. Where there's not going to be patience is on the defensive side of the ball, where they were loaded with talent, still are, and underperformed last year. I mean, to me, that was as big a reason as any that they were 8-9 last year. Rodgers obviously struggled with injuries, maybe wasn't as mentally into it, not as sharp maybe that in that regard as he has been in the past. But, when they needed their defense to kind of pull through for them, they did not. And by adding another top-line defensive player with Lucas Van Ness at number 13 overall, just tells you even more that they expect this defense to help Jordan Love along the way.
We sensed from the Packer fan base that they were ready to move on from Aaron Rodgers. What I haven't gotten a sense for, is that fair to say? Is that accurate?
I think that's fair, yeah. I think that's accurate. Yeah.
What I haven't gotten a sense for is the confidence level in Jordan Love at this point?
Yeah.
What is the expectation level for him? Because to your point, I had actually forgotten that they went 6-10 in A-Rod's first year. I just remember his brilliance very early on, and I think it was easy for everybody to see the potential and how good he was already the minute he stepped onto the field there. We just don't have that feeling or knowledge about Jordan Love at this point, and I'm sure he can turn heads, right? If they go 6-10 or 7-10, then and Jordan Love shows promise, that's the fan base is happy at that point, I would imagine.
I would say so, yeah. What people don't have, people on the outside, and us in the media included, we don't have what we had in 2007 when Rodgers was the third-year backup, and they played a game down in Dallas in late November, and Favre got hurt early, like first quarter early, and they were down big. Rodgers came in, and they didn't win the game, but it was a sign. Rodgers was really, really good in that game, really productive, made some big-time throws. And not that it was a full game, but it was three-quarters of a game. I remember, it's easy for Mike McCarthy to say this now, but he said this many, many times over the years, that when they got on the plane leaving Dallas that night, it was a Thursday night game, he and Ted Thompson said they felt like they knew what they had, and they could move on if that was the end for Brett, and they knew it. I don't think that we have that sense. We have one start in 2021 at Kansas City, and quite frankly, Jordan Love wasn't ready. Really hard situation, obviously playing a really good team on the road at Arrowhead. And if you remember, that was the week of the COVID deal with Rodgers when that's the reason, obviously, Love played, was Rodgers tested positive for COVID. And it wasn't just that, but do you remember, Dan, all the distraction and the hoopla over the immunization, vaccination thing? I mean, that was a really hard week for him. And then we saw last year in Philadelphia, almost, I guess it would have been 15 years to the day of that Dallas game that Rodgers played, and Jordan Love got to play the fourth quarter in Philadelphia. Similar situation. They were down a couple of touchdowns. Love came in, played two series, led a touchdown drive and a field goal drive. They still lost the game by double digits. It was a much, much smaller sample size, and even after the game, I asked Love, what kind of defense the Eagles were playing at that point in the game, and he even admitted, he goes, look, it was soft. It was not the blitzing defense that he saw in his first start in Kansas City. So there just isn't a lot. Now, if you talk to people on the inside and even people around the league, I remember talking to some former coaches about this. The team itself, the Packers, Matt LaFleur, Brian Gutekunst, the whole organization, they have a lot more to work with on Love than what we do. We don't see practice during the regular season other than to walk into the practice facility, take attendance, and then they kick us out. He didn't have preseason his rookie year because of the COVID deal. He missed a preseason game the next year because of a shoulder injury. So they have a lot more behind-the-scenes information. And as one former coach told me, there's no way that they would be moving on and so willing to move on from Aaron Rodgers if they didn't at least think that Jordan Love was ready. Now, does that mean he's going to be great? No, but they must have a feeling that he has a chance to at least do that. And the other thing, Dan, is that they need to find out, right? Like if he sat another year, then what? Then he's playing his fifth year, would be his first year as a starter. That's just, it's probably too late.
It was kind of a no-brainer that you had to move on from Rodgers and see what you had in Jordan Love. I mean, there's so many different scenarios here, right? He has a great season. They decide to pay him early like they did with Aaron Rodgers, so they don't, they're not on the hook for a $250 million contract after the season. He flounders, and they decide, hey, we got to go get another quarterback. I won't ask you to pick this scenario. Certainly there's a lot of different directions that this can go. But I am going to ask you about Aaron Rodgers in New York. And what do you think the most likely scenario is for him there in terms of success? He gets healthy. Yeah. He's been rejuvenated. He's in that. I don't know if the New York media market is as big of a deal as it once was.
I totally agree with that.
I think that's an old, tired narrative because it was. Listen, I'm from Washington, D.C. I was a local reporter there for a long time before I went to NFL Network. And that was a tough market, but it wasn't as tough as Philly. It wasn't as tough as DC. And it was very different than a place like Green Bay or Nashville that didn't have as many media members, right? But
here's the thing actually about that I think there's a misconception about Green Bay is that there's actually it's the only thing here, the whole state. I mean, at every Wednesday at Aaron Rodgers' locker, there's 30-plus reporters standing around there. Like, the Packers beat reporters have a bigger traveling corps than like Chicago's group or Detroit's group. I mean, so there is that sense, and I've always been a little defensive about it because I think there is a little bit of that misconception. Now, I think the difference is that maybe the Packers market is more about football and less about, like, it's more the beat writer driven than it is columnist driven. You know, there's maybe not as much opinion out there, and I also think that, again, this is my perception from the outside, so tell me if I'm wrong, sometimes the headlines in the tabloids in New York don't necessarily match the story, right? Like, I mean, they go for the big headline, which I think they're full. Every couple of weeks I go on the Daily News and the Post and just look at the covers because I think the headline writers are outstanding. And then the other thing, too, I think it's more away from football where it's the difference. I mean, we've already seen him at, a Rangers game and a Knicks game, and you know, the photographs. I don't know what's on page 6 about him, but they're, you know, I joked with Rich when I was on a couple of weeks ago about this. I said, look, there's no page 6 in the Green Bay Press Gazette. Well, actually, there is a page 6, but it's either the farm report or the church notices or something like that, right? There is no paparazzi here. So I think that's where the difference is to me, where the rest of his life outside of football is maybe going to be a little bit more scrutinized. You know, if they lose and he's at a game the next day in Manhattan, maybe there's, you know, some funny headlines about that. But he was actually, you know, he loves to talk about football. He's really good with answering questions about football topics that he's interested in. And I, from a performance standpoint, real quick, I would expect, knowing Aaron, having covered him for his whole career, I would expect him to come out with a absolute desire to show the Packers that they were wrong to move on. You know, when they drafted Jordan Love, I remember a coach telling me this is really going to light a fire under Rodgers, and sure enough, the next 2 years he wins MVP both years. So I expect him to play very similar to that in the regular season. The question that I think everybody has is, does he still have it when it comes to the elimination games, the playoff games? I mean, since they won the Super Bowl, I believe has been, you have to double check this, but I'm pretty sure his playoff record is 7-9. So it's basically a season's worth of playoff games, and he's 7-9, which is not good. And then you throw in last year's basically playoff game, the regular season finale against Detroit. That was, you know, they win that during the playoffs, and he was not very good in that game either. There's plenty of questions that I think the Packers organization came to the realization, look, we won 13 games 3 years in a row, and we never got past the NFC Championship game. And not that it's all on Rodgers, but there were times where he could have tilted the field like he used to, and it just didn't happen.
All right, getaway question, Packers draft. You talked about Lucas Van Ness, the defensive end out of Iowa. And
total Packers pick.
He never started a game, right?
Pick. Yeah. Midwest guy from Chicago, played at Iowa, Big Ten guy, total Packers pick. But anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I wanted to ask about that because he's the first guy to go in the first round. He's never started a game before, but he played more than the starters did. He's, you know, the guy's built like a Greek god. It's going to be interesting to see how he pans out. Was there anybody else in the draft that was a surprise or garnered a lot of attention there? I mean, for me, it was Sean Clifford in the 5th round, the quarterback out of Penn State, who's the guy who actually beat out Will Levis at Penn State and forced Levis to transfer, right?
Yeah, twice, 2 seasons. Look, I don't know a ton about Clifford. I knew they would take a quarterback. In fact, I wouldn't have been surprised if they took 2 when Rodgers took over in 2008. They drafted Brian Braum in the 2nd and Matt Flynn in the 7th. Obviously, we know how that worked out. Flynn became a better player. I just think that it was a Packers formula draft, right? Like 12 of their last 13 picks, including Van Ness, first-round picks, have been on the defensive side of the ball. The only offensive player is Love. The 2nd round, they've always done well with receivers. They took one again, Jaden Reed. Last year, Christian Watson was in that 2nd round, and he looks like he's going to be a player. guys I mentioned earlier, like Jordy Nelson and Greg Jennings and even Randall Cobb were all second-round picks. So it sort of just followed the formula that this organization, sort of does, and it doesn't necessarily matter who the GM is. They've changed GMs. They've all come from the Ron Wolf scouting tree, and they just sort of operate the way they do. And there's going to be young guys that get a chance to play. Every draft pick they had last year, I believe every one of them made the team. They didn't have 13 like they did this year, but like they were a good team. They were coming off a 13-win season, and they kept all their draft picks because that's how they operate. They're a draft and develop type team. And, they're going to need last year's draft class to play even better than it did, and then hopes that this year's draft class can sort of follow suit. But I would just say for the draft, it's like it's the formula. Like that's just, if you look up a Packers prototypical draft, this is what it is: a defensive front seven guy in the first round, and then some skill position guys sprinkled in.
Yeah, it was a typical Packers draft, no doubt about that. I did lie. I said that was a getaway question. Have to ask you about Matt LaFleur. I've known him since his days in Washington and his cup of coffee in Tennessee. He's been lucky enough to have peak A-Rod there to go 47-19 over his time there, and that record obviously is not going to be quite as good, at least for a year or so. But is there anybody who's breathing a bigger sigh of relief to be able to just kind of move on and move forward than Matt LaFleur?
It's interesting because he's in an interesting position, right? He even said, and I thought this was really interesting and honest from him, when not that anybody in the organization was publicly trashing Rodgers, but he said, look, I just want to say this about Aaron Rodgers. He made a lot of people around here a lot of money. Right? Like, I mean, he might have been hard to deal with or whatever, but these guys all got contract extensions, Gutekunst, Matt LaFleur, because of Rodgers. And, somebody joked with him at the owners' meetings in Phoenix last month. It's like, well, now we'll finally get to see the Matt LaFleur offense, right? And he just said, like, why is everyone saying that? And we're all saying that because we know Rodgers had a big influence over what they did, and LaFleur maybe had to give, compromise in some areas. So I think we're going to learn a lot about Matt LaFleur as a coach. He from being in Washington, he worked with Robert Griffin III as a rookie, and Cousins obviously too was there. And I talked to RG3 for a story maybe a week or two ago. It's still up on ESPN.com, just about how good Matt was with him in giving him the confidence to be like, look, if you throw an interception, as long as you made the right read, we're going to be patient with you. You just do things the right way. And I think Jordan Love is a quarterback who will do that, do things the right way, which meaning that's the way Matt LaFleur wants them. So, but I do think we're going to see, a lot of what Matt LaFleur is all about because, since that year in Washington, he's worked with a lot of veterans. He had Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. He had Rodgers here. He had Matt Ryan for a couple of years in Atlanta. In fact, it's Ryan's MVP year, I believe, 2016. He was the quarterback's coach. So it's been a while since he's really been the guy to work with a young quarterback. And I'm sure that's rejuvenated him a little bit.
Rob, thanks so much, man. I kept you longer than I had planned to.
Right.
One of the best in the business. Been covering the Packers forever. Currently covering them for ESPN.com. Listen, I've said this forever. Guys that are embedded, that are in the market, that's where you go to get your information. My buddy John Keim there in Washington, Teron Davenport in Nashville, Rob Demovsky in Green Bay. Go read them. It's great stuff. Rob, have a great rest of your week, my friend. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, really appreciate it, Dan. We'll be seeing you.
All right, man.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.